We don't rent to people like you. White landlady kicked out a black student. A week later, he bought the entire building. What happens when a black student is turned away despite a signed lease and homemade muffins? You won't believe whose name ends up etched on the front of that very building just weeks later. Malcolm Harris stood outside 208 Springvale Road with the weight of more than just a backpack on his shoulder. In one hand, he clutched a clear plastic container of cherry muffins, homemade, still faintly warm, dusted with just enough cinnamon to say, "I was raised right." Not because he thought muffins would win him a lease or soften a landlord's heart, but because that's what decency looked like in his household. His mother, a black woman who worked triple shifts as a nurse and still found time to iron his shirts and fix his heart, once told him with the kind of sincerity that lingers forever, "Son, being polite ain't enough for us. Being good isn't optional. It's survival." So yeah, he brought muffins. That's who he was raised to be. Courteous, considerate, thorough, and frankly, better prepared than he had any business needing to be. The house itself stood tall but tired, an old Victorian beast with cracked siding, tired shingles, and a rusty sign on the front porch that read, "No loud music after 9 p.m., as if the house had already judged the type of tenants it wanted before the bell even rang. No flowers in the windows, no welcome mat, just chipped paint and suspicion. But Malcolm, ever composed, adjusted his collar, gripped the container tighter, and rang the bell. It opened with a creak, revealing a white woman in her early 60s, bones sharp, blouse whiter than her knuckles, eyes that scanned him top to bottom like he was a barcode in a store she didn't remember shopping at. She blinked, twice. "Yes?" He offered a smile, one of those smiles that black folks perfect early in life, the kind that says, "I come in peace," even when you shouldn't have to. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Malcolm Harris. We spoke on Craigslist. You confirmed the rental, second floor, right unit. I have the lease, the check for first and last month's rent, and I brought some muffins, just to say thank you. Homemade cherry and cinnamon." She looked at the muffins like they were weapons. "Wait, you're Harris?" "Yes, ma'am. Malcolm Harris." Her eyes narrowed like she'd just swallowed a lemon and couldn't quite hide the sourness. She didn't take the muffins, didn't even glance at the paperwork. Instead, she inhaled, sharp and calculated, like she was preparing for a swim into hostile waters. "Listen," she started, glancing behind her as though rehearsing lines from a script she thought she'd never have to read out loud. "We've got families here. Good, quiet folks. Peaceful. I didn't know you were—" He raised his brow just enough to meet her unfinished sentence halfway. "Wasn't aware I was what?" She looked almost embarrassed. "Almost, but not enough. I just think, for the comfort of the neighbors and the peace of the building, maybe this isn't the right fit. You understand?" Oh, he understood, all right. He'd heard versions of this line his whole life, from teachers, from realtors, from employers who smiled too wide. "You're just not what we had in mind. You're not the right fit. We already went with someone else." The words changed, but the meaning? Always the same. He placed the muffins gently on the porch railing. Suddenly, they felt heavier than they had a minute ago. So did his chest. "I have the signed agreement. I have a check. You already confirmed everything? This is illegal." "I can return the check," she replied too quickly. "I have another couple interested. A white couple. Very quiet. Very proper. It's not about you. It's just the context." Context, that's what she called it. That coded, cowardly way of saying, "I don't want your kind in my building, but I also don't want to look like the kind of person who says it out loud." Context was the word racists used when they wanted to sound polite while still slamming the door. He didn't yell, didn't plead, didn't throw the contract in her face. That wasn't his way. Instead, he looked her dead in the eye with a calm that came from years of being rejected by people who smiled as they did it, and said, "You're not ashamed of me. You're ashamed of what it says about you that you feel this way." Then he turned and walked down those splintered steps, slow and steady, his back straight like he wasn't carrying disappointment, like he was dragging it behind him by the collar. The porch creaked. His foot landed on one of the muffins, still in the container, and he heard the muffled crunch of broken sweetness under his heel. Perfect. Cinnamon and shame. From the next balcony over, a voice rang out. Young, white, arrogant. "Hey, bro. Tough break, huh? Welcome to West Ridge." Malcolm didn't flinch, didn't respond, didn't give the boy the performance he was hoping for. That night, Malcolm lay on the lumpy mattress of a motel called the Green Nest, though there was nothing green or nest-like about it. The air was thick with the scent of old air freshener and stale cigarette smoke. He stared at the ceiling, the plaster above him warped with time, just like the idea of justice in this country sometimes felt. Flimsy, outdated, just one wrong move from collapse. Earlier that day, he had helped an elderly woman at the bus stop carry her groceries. She smiled at him like he was her own grandson, told him he had kind eyes. 30 minutes later, he was turned away from a home he'd already legally secured, like his skin tone was a criminal record. He texted his mother, not about the rejection, just that he arrived, that he was safe. That was enough. Smile on the screen. Ache in the gut. That old recipe. The next morning, buttoned up, back straight, and shirt freshly ironed from his backpack, Malcolm walked through the glass doors of the Chicago Institute of Architecture like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just slept under a flickering light bulb in a motel that charged by the week. Like his dignity hadn't been dented. In the hallway, Professor Carter, an older white man with a salt and pepper beard and a heart that beat to the rhythm of Coltrane, stopped him. "Harris," he said, tilting his head, "you look off today. Everything all right?" And for the first time, Malcolm didn't lie. He didn't downplay, didn't sugarcoat. He told the truth, in that calm, almost clinical tone people use when they've cried it all out already. He told the professor about the muffins, the smile, the door, the rejection, the wait. Carter frowned, not performatively, not "that's a shame" kind of frown, the real kind, where his jaw clenched just a little and his eyes darted like he was already forming a plan. "You have 5 minutes?" he asked. "There's someone I want you to meet." 2 days later, Malcolm was seated in a leather chair on the 27th floor of a downtown high-rise, staring through a wall of glass that made the skyline look like a blueprint. Across from him sat Jonathan Crawford, a clean-cut, sharp-tongued real estate developer, with eyes like he read every contract twice. "I saw the video," Crawford said without looking up. 700,000 views and counting. Somebody caught that little interaction you had with your former landlord. You held your own. Didn't break. That's rare. I didn't know I was being recorded." "Well," Crawford smirked, "life records everything. The question is, what do you say when you think nobody's listening?" He slid a folder across the table. "Your internship application to our foundation was rejected. Mistake on our part. I'm here to fix that. We want you to lead a new project." Malcolm blinked. He expected an apology, maybe a scholarship offer, or a pat on the back. "But this? We're buying the building," Crawford continued. "That building, and you're going to turn it into something better. Housing for students, entrepreneurs, the kind of people who never get first dibs on anything. You won't be a tenant, Harris. You'll be the one who decides who gets the keys." On the 4th day after the papers were signed, Malcolm Harris stood on the sidewalk outside the building that once felt like a dream wrapped in drywall and quiet promises. Now it looked more like a sad stage set for a tragic play nobody wanted to see twice. The paint, once a hopeful gray, was now cracked and peeling like a lie told too many times. The windows stared blankly, as if the building itself had grown ashamed of what it had witnessed. It was the kind of place that pretended to be welcoming, but only until it got a good look at who was knocking. But Malcolm wasn't knocking this time. He wasn't asking to be let in. He wasn't carrying muffins or a lease agreement in his hand. This time he came as the official representative of Clinton Holds. He came with a folder full of legal power and a key that did more than open a door. It rewrote a history. A black Tesla Model Y purred to a stop in front of the house. As the driver's side door opened and Malcolm stepped out, tailored navy coat, clean lines, quiet strength, the woman on the porch went pale. That same porch, that same white cardigan. But this time Miss Weston wasn't hiding disdain behind a smile. Now it was fear, thin, wrinkled, and real. The kind of fear you see when someone suddenly realizes the leash they've been holding wasn't attached to a puppy after all, but to a young lion who'd learned to walk upright. "That's him," she muttered, her voice so faint it barely stirred the air. Malcolm walked slowly, deliberately. He took off his sunglasses and tucked them into his coat pocket. "Mr. Harris," she said, her voice quivering like a tightrope about to snap. I wasn't myself that day." He looked at her without blinking. "You mean you were under the influence of ignorance?" He paused just long enough to let the silence stretch like a courtroom hallway. "Or was it power? Because you seemed pretty certain. No hesitation. Not a drop of doubt when you threw me out like I'd tracked in mud from a street you refused to admit was yours." She swallowed hard, clutching the folds of her cardigan like they could shield her from accountability. Next to her, a man in a gray suit, the bank's agent, cleared his throat and extended a folder toward her with a certain cold efficiency. Inside were the final transfer documents. The building, once hers, was now under the ownership of the foundation. The debt, bought out, the foreclosure, finalized. Signed and sealed. Her signature, her name, her loss. "I had a plan to restructure the loan," she said, her voice cracking like old wood. "I was working on it, Malcolm tilted his head slightly, not in pity, but in polite disbelief. You had a plan to erase me. Now the math has changed. And math, Miss Weston, doesn't care about context. The bank agent handed her the envelope, nodded and stepped back. Malcolm didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Justice, when done right, doesn't shout. It speaks in the hush of things finally made right. That evening, Malcolm sat at a quiet corner table in a cafe just down the street, papers spread before him like a map of a new world. Across from him sat Jonathan Crawford, the man who helped make this moment real, sipping espresso and watching his young partner not with pride, but with a sense of responsibility. You're not chasing revenge, Crawford said after a pause, eyes narrowing. But you found it anyway. Malcolm stirred his coffee slowly, staring into the swirling cream as if it held the blueprints of the future. I'm not building for payback, he said. I'm building because if we don't own our spaces, we will forever be guests in a house that smiles until we ask to stay. Crawford nodded. Then make this building a statement, not just walls and wires, a message. I don't want it to shout, Malcolm said, setting down his spoon. I want it to whisper, you're welcome here, because we've heard get out enough for one lifetime. The paperwork took time, as it always does when people who once had power try to find ways to cling to it. But while the lawyers and clerks polished the final steps, Malcolm was already buried in his next phase, his real work. He sat for hours in the quiet hum of an unfinished office. No Wi-Fi, no distractions, just architectural software and high-resolution photos of the building's worst parts. Moldy corners, bowed ceilings, broken baseboards that had grown used to being ignored. He studied every inch, not out of vengeance, but from principle. If you're going to build a home, you build it right. You build it to hold hope, not just tenants. One afternoon during a contractor's meeting, a young man in paint-splattered coveralls approached him, a grin playing on his lips that didn't quite reach his eyes. Hey man, you really the owner now? That's wild. Like a movie or something. Kid gets kicked out, comes back with a bag of cash and takes over. Hollywood stuff, right? Malcolm turned to him, expression flat like drywall, before the first coat of primer. This isn't a movie, he said calmly. Movies give you a climax, a cheer, and a credit roll. I've got invoices, deadlines, and liability insurance. So either do your job or go work somewhere that doesn't hire people like me to sign your checks. The young man blinked. No more grins after that. That weekend, while the demolition crews cleared out the old drywall, Malcolm stopped by a bakery on South Haywood, a place that had known him since he was a kid selling lemonade out front. The woman behind the counter, Miss Lacey, looked up and grinned so wide it felt like sunlight. Malcolm Harris, baby. They tell me you're the student now. The one on the news, the one they said bought the building. I'm still the same, he said, smiling back. Only difference is, now I've got paperwork. She chuckled. No, sugar. You're not the same. You're the answer. To every time they tried to turn you into a question. He nodded slowly, and for the first time in weeks, the smile on his face didn't feel like armor. But still, there was a quiet in him now. Not sadness, not bitterness. Just that strange stillness that comes when you win a fight no one clapped for. Later that night, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message was short. I was wrong. May I come see it? Just once. Miss Weston. He stared at the screen for a long time, thumb hovering over the reply button. Then he closed the message and deleted it. 4 weeks after taking over, the building was ready. Paint fresh, pipes humming like they were finally being listened to. The lights worked, the floors gleamed, and more importantly, the future was welcome inside. Young tenants began arriving. Black students, Latino students, Asian students. The ones who never got the call back. The ones who stopped believing applications ever mattered. They walked the halls like they were dreaming. One young woman whispered to her friend, "The ceilings don't leak," as if she couldn't believe it was possible. On Friday evening, Malcolm hosted the opening. No speeches, no media, no velvet ropes, just warm light, quiet jazz in the background, and the smell of fresh bread from the welcome baskets. Above the entrance, etched into a brushed metal plaque, was a single line, "You are not extra, you are the blueprint." The night before the grand opening, Malcolm Harris stood on the rooftop of the building that just a month prior had slammed a door in his face. Now that same structure bore his name, his vision, his fight. It no longer whispered, "You don't belong here." Tonight it stood silent like a monument, waiting to be filled with breath, stories, and futures. The city lay stretched out before him in gold and steel. In one hand, he held a battered thermos of coffee. In the other, folded and fragile, was the original rental receipt, creased at the corners. The ink faded but not forgotten. The date still stood out, bold and cruel. like a scar with numbers. It was the receipt he had once handed to a woman who pretended he didn't exist the moment she saw his face. He descended from the rooftop quietly, slipped through the freshly painted stairwell, and made his way to the main floor. The building was asleep, but not dead, not anymore. He opened the breaker box near the entrance, took a strip of tape, and fastened that old receipt to the inside of the door. Not for the world to see, for himself. A message etched in silence. If they won't let you in, build your own entrance. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline the next evening, the courtyard in front of the building had begun to hum with life. Not a crowd. This wasn't a spectacle. It was a gathering, an assembly of people who had never been handed keys without suspicion. Professors, students, neighbors from down the street, small business owners from the south side who had heard the rumors. Some came needing a place to live. Others came needing proof that a young black man could be more than a footnote, more than a cautionary tale, more than a silent maybe in a system built to say no. There was no red carpet, no cameras flashing, just folding chairs, community laughter, and a speaker playing Marvin Gaye and Billie Holiday like a memory. The air smelled like grilled wings, home-baked cookies, and something else, something fresh, like the sound of a lock turning for the very first time. Malcolm stood at the top of the entrance steps watching, calm, centered, until, of course, life decided to throw one last curveball, because there she was, Miss Weston. She emerged from the crowd like a glitch in the program, wearing a dress that tried and failed to be modest, a smile that tried and failed to hide discomfort. She looked out of place, like a relic from another time trying to pretend it belonged to this one. "Malcolm, Mr. Harris," she began, her voice a mix of hesitation and forced familiarity. "I just wanted to say—" "To say what?" Malcolm said, not harsh but loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "That you're proud of me? That this was all just a misunderstanding? That I turned out to be one of the good ones after all?" She flinched slightly, her lips tightening. "I didn't come for that. I was wondering if I could see the inside. Just a quick look." Malcolm looked her square in the eye. And what he saw wasn't the woman who once turned him away. It was the entire system she represented. And he realized then, some walls you don't repaint. You demolish them and start again. "No," he said clearly. "This place isn't for those who close doors. It's for the ones who've had them slammed in their faces their whole lives." She didn't respond. She turned almost weightless and vanished back into the crowd that didn't part for her. Malcolm stepped up to the microphone. He didn't clear his throat, didn't wait for silence. He just spoke. "I won't be long," he said. "I'm not the type who likes to hear himself talk. I'm the type who, for a long time, wasn't allowed to talk at all." The crowd quieted instantly. Phones came out, but not to distract. People hit record. This wasn't a speech. It was a moment. "A year ago, I was a student looking for a place to live. I had money. I had documents. I even had muffins." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. But that didn't matter, because what people saw first, before the contract, before the handshake, before the smile, was my skin, and that was louder than any words I could say. He paused, his hand resting lightly on the railing beside him. "I stood right here, on this very porch, with muffins in one hand and a signed lease in the other. I was told I wasn't welcome. I wasn't a threat. I wasn't rude. I was just not the right fit. Tonight, I stand here holding something else entirely. Not muffins. Keys." He held up the silver ring of keys and let them jangle slightly, a sound sharper than applause. "These doors," he said, "they don't close like they used to." The applause didn't erupt. It unfolded. Slow, steady, full. Not celebration. Validation. "This building isn't a shelter," Malcolm continued. "It's not a crash pad. It's a home. For people who are learning, working, dreaming. People who've been told in every possible way that they don't belong. Well, here's a space where they do." He stepped down from the mic. People came to shake his hand, pat his shoulder, hug him without asking. But Malcolm didn't linger in the spotlight. He had one more stop to make. When the night ended, long after the music had faded and the folding chairs were stacked, Malcolm walked the halls. The paint still smelled faintly new. The tiles clicked softly underfoot. These were not luxury rooms, but they were clean, bright, honest. He reached the second floor. Unit 2A. The very apartment he was once denied. A new plaque hung beside the door. Residential block 2A, Project Mentor, M. Harris. Inside, a young couple lived now. She was studying biology. He was an aspiring designer. Neither of them had to pass a test coded in silence. They didn't have to translate politeness into acceptability. They were just allowed to live. Malcolm reached into his pocket and pulled out one old key, rusted, jagged, the one he never got to use. He placed it in a small wooden box, closed the lid, and wrote on the top, "Archive of errors, do not repeat." The next morning, his phone rang. "Mr. Harris?" It was Professor Carter from the architecture school. "You're officially a discussion topic now. Your speech, it's been everywhere. The dean wants to invite you to speak. Something about architecture as resistance." Malcolm smiled. "Professor, I'm not a revolutionary." "No," Carter replied, "but you built something that made people feel like they belong. And in this world, son, that is a revolution." He hung up. Malcolm sat down at his drafting table. A new project waited, another building, another neighborhood. This one was near the school where he first learned geometry, a forgotten zone, dismissed by investors, invisible to city planners. He picked up his pencil, drew the first line, and under that line he wrote, "While they're trying to lock us out, we'll be busy building better doors."